They noticed him the moment he stepped off the bus. Not because he looked important, because he looked out of place. The recruits stood in loose lines under the pale morning sky, duffel bags at their feet, eyes darting with nervous energy. Everyone looked young. Sharp, tight shoulders, fresh haircuts, restless confidence. Everyone except the man near the fence. He stood slightly apart, hands behind his back, wearing plain fatigues with no visible insignia. His hair was gray at the temples. His posture was relaxed, almost casual. His face carried lines that came from years of sun and silence, not age alone. Someone whispered, "Who's the old guy?" A few recruits smirked. "Must be admin," another muttered. "Or lost." The man didn't react. He just watched. Private Ethan Morales nudged the guy next to him, Kyle Bennett, and nodded toward the fence. "You think he's here for paperwork?" Kyle laughed under his breath. "If he's training with us, I'm quitting today." A few others overheard and snickered quietly. The old man met none of their eyes. He simply observed, calm, patient, as if time worked differently for him. Moments later, the sharp sound of boots hit concrete. The chatter died instantly. The younger drill instructor stormed into view, voice cutting through the air like a blade. "On your feet. Bags up. Move." The recruits scrambled, hearts racing. Lines snapped into shape. Silence followed. The old man didn't move. That caught attention. The drill instructor turned, irritation flashing. What are you waiting for?" The old man stepped forward calmly. "Just observing." The instructor frowned. "Observing what?" "Who listens?" The man replied. That a few recruits exchanged glances. The drill instructor scoffed. "You here to audit us, or something?" "Something like that," the old man said. The instructor waved him off. "Stand aside. Don't get in the way." The man nodded and stepped back without argument. As the recruits were marched toward the barracks, whispers resumed. "Did you see his face?" Someone whispered. "Man looks like he retired 10 years ago. Hope he's not one of us." Ethan shook his head. "No way. Bootcamp instructors don't look like that." The old man followed at a distance. Inside the barracks, the recruits dumped their gear, adrenaline still buzzing. The air smelled of detergent and new boots. Everything felt unfamiliar, rigid, loud. Minutes later, the door slammed open. The same drill instructor barked orders, pacing like a predator. "Eyes front. Back straight." The old man entered last, still no insignia. No raised voice. The instructor gestured toward him. "This is—" He paused, glancing at a clipboard. "Mr. Harris. He'll be around." A murmur rippled through the room. Mr. Harris, not Sergeant, not Chief, just Mr. Kyle leaned toward Ethan. "Told you." Paper pusher. Harris stood quietly near the wall, arms crossed loosely. The drill instructor continued, launching into rules, consequences, expectations. Every sentence carried threat and volume. Harris watched the recruits' faces as they absorbed it. Fear, ego, defiance, motivation. He saw it all. When the instructor finished, he turned to Harris. "You good?" Harris nodded. "Very." They left together. That night, the recruits collapsed into bunks, exhausted and wired. Kyle whispered, "If that old guy's evaluating us, we're fine." Ethan wasn't so sure. Something about Harris bothered him. Not weakness, but restraint, like a coiled spring that hadn't been touched yet. The next morning, they learned how wrong they were. The lights snapped on before dawn. "Up! Move!" Recruits scrambled. Chaos erupted. Then a new voice cut through the noise. Not loud, controlled. "Stop!" The room froze. Harris stood at the center aisle and, shouting. "No theatrics, just presence. You have 30 seconds," he said calmly, "to stand in formation outside." Someone laughed nervously. Harris turned his head slightly. His eyes met Kyle's. The laugh died. They moved. Outside, cold air bit into their lungs. The sky was still dark. Harris walked slowly in front of the line, hands clasped behind his back. "Some of you think this is about strength," he said. "Others think it's about endurance. A few think it's about surviving the loudest voice in the room." He stopped. "It's none of those." He turned to face them. "It's about discipline when no one is yelling." Silence. That a younger drill instructor approached, confused. "Sir," Harris raised a finger gently. The instructor stopped mid-step. Harris turned back to the recruits. You mocked me yesterday. A few faces flushed. You judged without information, he continued. That's human, but it's also dangerous. He removed his cap. The insignia beneath caught the early light. The line stiffened. Even a younger instructor snapped to attention. Harris's voice didn't change. My name is Thomas Harris. I am your senior drill instructor. No one breathed. I don't shout, Harris said, because combat doesn't warn you with volume. He paced slowly. I don't rush, he continued, because panic gets people killed. He stopped in front of Kyle. You thought I was weak, Harris said evenly. Kyle swallowed. No, sir. Harris tilted his head. You hesitated. Kyle straightened. Yes, sir. Harris nodded once. Honesty is a start. He moved on. For the next 8 weeks, Harris said, you will learn control. Over your body, over your mouth, over your assumptions. The recruits stood frozen, fear replacing arrogance. Harris turned to the younger instructor. Begin. What followed wasn't chaos, that IT was precision. Every movement corrected, every mistake noted. No jilling, no insults, just relentless standards. That be why midday, the recruits were shattered. Sweat soaked through uniforms. Muscles burned. Harris never raised his voice. That made it worse. During a break, Ethan whispered, this is worse than shouting. Kyle nodded weakly. Yeah. Harris stood nearby, pretending not to hear. He heard everything. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Harris addressed them again. Today was introduction, he said. Tomorrow we build. He paused. If you're still judging me, he added, you're behind. As they were dismissed, Ethan felt something unfamiliar. Respect, not forced. Earned. Later that night, as lights went out, Kyle whispered, I was wrong. Ethan didn't reply. Neither of them slept well, because they knew now. The old man wasn't old, he was experienced. And this was only the beginning. That if you're enjoying this realistic military story and want more powerful, character-driven narratives, make sure to subscribe to Generals and Truth Stories. The second week of boot camp began without warning. No speeches. No build-up, just pressure. Private Ethan Morales woke before the lights snapped on, his body already aching in places he didn't know could hurt. Around him, the barracks breathed in shallow rhythms. Men half asleep, half braced for impact. When the lights finally exploded on, it wasn't chaos that followed. The IT was speed. Not because anyone was yelling, because no one wanted to be slow under Thomas Harris's eyes. Outside, the air was cold and sharp. Harris stood waiting, hands behind his back, watching them form up. He said nothing while they adjusted their lines, corrected spacing, fixed posture. Silence stretched. Finally, he spoke. If I have to correct you, you're late. That was all. They ran, not a sprint, not a jog, a controlled pace that punished impatience. Anyone who surged ahead burned out. Anyone who lagged fell behind and paid for it later. Kyle Bennett struggled early. His confidence had carried him through the first days, but Harris's methods stripped it away. There was no one to rebel against. No volume to blame. Just standards. During strength drills, Harris moved among them like a shadow. He didn't bark reps. He didn't insult form. That he simply stopped beside you and waited. That was worse. When Ethan's arms trembled during push-ups, Harris crouched near him. Breathe, Harris said quietly. Control precedes strength. Ethan adjusted. He finished up by the end of the session. The recruits were broken in a way shouting had never achieved. Their muscles were exhausted, but their minds were sharper. Later that day, they faced their first failure. A navigation exercise. Simple on paper. Directions. Time limit. They rushed. They got lost. When they returned late, braced for punishment, Harris stood by the marker, checking his watch. You failed, he said calmly. N.O. angered. N.O. threat. You assumed speed would compensate for thinking, Harris continued. It didn't. He looked down the line. We'll repeat it tomorrow. Kyle clenched his jaw. Sir, permission to ask a question. Harris nodded. Are we being tested physically or mentally? Harris regarded him for a moment. Yes. The following days blurred into a cycle of exertion and reflection. Harris spoke rarely, but when he did, it stayed with them. Discipline is choosing correctly when you're tired. Strength without control is noise. Respect isn't demanded. It's demonstrated. Slowly, the recruits changed. Not louder. Better. Kyle struggled most with humility. He was strong, fast, and used to being noticed. Under Harris, none of that mattered. One afternoon, during a team carry exercise, Kyle lost his grip. The load dropped. The team faltered. Silence followed. Harris walked over. "Who failed?" he asked. Kyle opened his mouth. Ethan spoke first. "We did, sir." Harris studied them, then nodded. "Correct." They repeated the drill. That night, Kyle sat on his bunk, staring at his hands. "I thought strength was enough," he said quietly. Ethan shrugged. "Maybe that's why he's here." Week 4 brought the real test. A night exercise. No lights. No shouting. Limited communication. Fatigue pressed down hard. Halfway through, one recruit panicked. Broke formation. Caused confusion. Harris halted the exercise. He gathered them under the dim glow of a single light. "No one is in trouble," he said. Relief flickered, then faded as he continued. But someone forgot the mission. He looked at the panicked recruit, not with anger, but understanding. "Fear isn't failure," Harris said. "Letting fear lead is." The exercise resumed. They passed, barely. Later, Captain Reeves, the same base commander, watched from a distance, arms crossed. "You're changing them," he said to Harris. Harris didn't look at him. "They're changing themselves." By week 6, the recruits no longer whispered about the old man. They listened. Kyle approached Harris one evening. "Sir, permission to speak freely." Harris nodded. "I judged you," Kyle said, "and I was wrong." Harris regarded him. "What did you learn?" "That experience doesn't announce itself." Harris allowed a small nod. "Good." Graduation approached quietly, and speeches were promised, and rewards hinted. But on the final day, the recruits stood in formation, uniforms worn but precise, posture solid. Harris faced them. "You arrived here loud," he said. "Certain. Fast to judge." He paced slowly. "You leave quieter," he continued. "More aware. Slower to assume." He stopped. "That's progress." He looked at Ethan, at Kyle, at the others. "You won't remember every drill," Harris said, "but you'll remember restraint. And one day, that will matter more than strength." He stepped back. For the last time, he said, "Dismissed." The recruits held formation. Harris tilted his head slightly. "Go." They broke that as they left. Ethan looked back. Harris stood alone, same as the first day. Still. Watching. Kyle joined Ethan. He never raised his voice. Ethan nodded. He didn't need to. As the bus pulled away, Harris remained where he was, hands behind his back, gaze steady. The old man had never been old. He had been forged. If you value realistic, character-driven military stories that focus on discipline, leadership, and earned respect, make sure to subscribe to Generals and Truth Stories, because true strength isn't loud, and the strongest lessons are taught quietly.